Good morning, everybody. My name is Connor Flanagan. I'm the Director of Education here at the Southampton History Museum. Today, we are joined by Joe Jannsen, and he is a contributing author to Decoy magazine. And today's talk, he's going to be going into great depth and detail about something that a lot of people out in this region are really interested in. Some people use very actively decoys, decoy ducks, but specifically the decoys of one specific individual who I'm going to turn over to him now, and he can start talking about. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat or the Q&A function below, and I'll pop back in at the end to answer all your questions. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Connor. As Connor said, my name is Joe Jannsen. I'm a contributing writer for Decoy magazine, and this presentation is going to be based on research that was done by myself and my fellow researcher, Jamie Reason, who unfortunately could not join us today. It will really be focused on the decoys of Charles Sumner Bunn, with some biographical information sprinkled in. If you're interested in more of his biography, I would definitely check out a book called Time and Memories, Oral Histories and Stories of a Family of Shinnecock, Apache Indian, Hungarian Ancestry, by David Bunn Martine, who was Bunn's great-grandson. So with that, I will get the presentation going and we can dive in. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. So Charles Sumner Bunn was born on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in 1865. At the age of 11, he lost his father, who was a whaler, when the ship, the Circassian, came ashore in Bridgehampton. David Bunn was one of 11 Shinnecocks who drowned trying to get the ship's cargo off the ship as it broke apart in a storm. There were actually 5 members from the Bunn family that perished on that in that effort. These are a couple of photos of Charles Bunn. The first one, circa 1885, is at the age of 20, and later he's shown on the porch of his home with the family dog. Charles Bunn was a college-educated man. He actually attended studies at New Paltz. So one of the earliest written accounts of Charles Sumner Bunn is as a hunting guide, and it's from a book that was published in 1903. And the highlighted areas in red here are where it talks about Charles Bunn's guiding for these gentlemen as they were hunting shorebirds. And it talks about his ability to whistle the birds in, and also that they were hunting over shorebird decoys. And again, talks about how successful they were on that day. This is a photo of Charles Bunn taken in 1909. It's actually from the David Bunn Martine collection. And also on the back of the photo is some information that was written that identifies Charles Bunn as a guide, and that sportsmen would hire him to help them hunt in the areas around Shinnecock Bay. This slide shows a couple of Charles Bunn's business cards on the left of the screen. In particular, one says specially equipped for snipe and duck shooting, and that we infer he was specially equipped because he was providing decoys that sportsmen could hunt over. On the right side of the screen are 2 advertisements that Charles Bunn had put in the Southampton Press. One, again, advertising his guiding services, but also that he was also guiding for fishing parties. He would take people out on his boat to fish. And again, this included areas around Shinnecock Bay, and as you see here, also on Peconic Bay. This is a photo of Charles Bunn taken in 1938. It's actually from the East Hampton Library collection. And again, references Charles Bunn as a guide for hunters, also mentions that he was a farmer, but that's not really where his heart was. His heart was really in the marshes and bays around Shinnecock where he could hunt. This photo, Charles shows Charles Bunn with an unidentified man. There are some folks that actually think that might be Teddy Roosevelt. There is definitely a striking resemblance to Teddy Roosevelt, but we have not been able to confirm that and have not identified that gentleman with Charles Bunn. So this is the photo that sort of started a lot of the research into Charles Bunn. This was taken in 1906 at the National Sportsman Show, which was an annual show held for many years at Madison Square Garden. In the center, seated, is Charles Bunn with a pile of his decoys in front of him. And the gentleman leaning on the picket fence is a very interesting character. Definitely worth looking up if you're not familiar with him. That's Captain Bill Graham. He was actually the organizer of the Long Island exhibit at the Sportsman Show. So to zoom in a little bit on this photograph, to get a closer look at some of the decoys, you can see a black duck that I actually own. It was the first Charles Bunn decoy I acquired. And you can see the similarity between the decoy I have and one of the ones in particular where the arrow's pointing. Very similar in form and carving style. This was a pamphlet that was actually sold at that same show in 1906. It was actually prepared by Will Graham and published by him. And there's some interesting information from Will Graham in the editor's notes that, again, talks about Charles Bunn as a professional guide. And here actually references that he makes decoys, which Will Graham considered fancy, and that they were available at the show. So what this does, it provides written documentation that supports the photograph of Charles Bunn sitting at that show selling his decoys. This is a second photograph that we actually found in Harper's Weekly from that same show. Again, Charles Bunn is standing, not the gentleman leaning on the boat, just to his right in this photograph. And you can see the decoys very clearly in this photo that, again, is the same style and design that of the decoys that we know Charles Bunn had made. This was a document that was prepared in 1946 that talks about Charles Bunn as part of it, that he carved decoys as part of, sort of a survival of this traditional Indian skill set. This is an article that was written and published in the local paper, the News Review, from April 1952, so shortly before Charles Bunn's death. And again, a couple notes that were pulled from it, a couple quotes that were pulled from it, referring to him as the dean of Suffolk County decoy carvers, that sportsmen were always looking to acquire his decoys, references him selling his decoys at the Sportsman Show. And again, speaks to, Bunn was asked about where the best sort of hunting was, and he referred to Montauk, and I'll talk more about Montauk as we go on. So this is a publication for the Shinnecock annual powwow that continues to this day. This was the 25th anniversary of that event. And again, pulled from inside that, it talks about Charles Bunn being an excellent hunting guide and references him carving snipe, which was the common term for shorebirds at that time, for all shorebirds, and ducks and geese. And then he sold them by the hundred. So he was very prolific, and again, selling many of these decoys. So back in the early 1980s, David Bunn Martine began recording his grandmother, Alice Bunn Martinez, who's Charles Bunn's daughter. And he started this because he was concerned that so much of the history of the Shinnecocks was being lost. So he wanted to record this. And he started taping her and then started transcribing verbatim everything she said during those interviews. So in speaking about her father and his history with decoys. She says he, carved all his life, carved ducks, geese, and snipe, again, the common term for all shorebirds at the time. She says he carved every type of decoy, from her recollection. And she also refers to the Sportsman Show as a big event where her father, Charles, would go take all the decoys, he had available, and that he also would take orders at this event. So this is a decoy that I actually own. It's a redhead decoy. It has the name Bunn carved in the bottom. It originally came to auction in 1973 at the William Mackey auction. William Mackey was a very early collector in decoys. Had written a book on decoy collecting too in 1965. And it then sold again at auction in 1993. And I purchased it at auction in 2014 as the work of Charles Bunn. The previous auctions had been sold as the work of William Bowman, which is, again, where much of the research we're trying to reattribute the decoys to Charles Bunn from William Bowman. This is a photo of the bottom of the decoy. You can see the Bunn name carved in the bottom, also has the Mackey collection stamp. And there's also another carved letter. It's either a W or an M, depending on how you look at it. And again, that's probably at some point it was in someone else's hunting rig, and they sort of carved that as a mark of ownership. So we're often asked when we talk about Charles Bunn where the William Bowman or Bill Bowman name came from and how it got attributed to this group of decoys. So Harold Herrick was a hunter in the late 1800s, and he kept a gunning diary. And he has two references in his diary to Bill Bowman, one in 1890, one in 1891, about Bowman hunting out in the marshes around where the Herricks live, which was in Lawrence, Long Island, so in Nassau County. And these are the only two written documentations for Bill Bowman. There's no known written account documenting he ever made decoys. These just document that he hunted shorebirds. So beginning in 1959, the Herrick family started donating decoys to the Suffolk Museum in Stony Brook. It's now known as the Long Island Museum, and identifying who they thought carved the decoys they were donating. And of the decoy makers they identified, Captain Ben Verity and Captain Dan Havens, those two have been reattributed to Obadiah Verity and William Southard. The only sort of name that is stuck has been Bill Bowman on those Herrick decoys that were donated to the museum. But it does make one question that identification as well, since their other decoys have been reattributed. So this is a letter from, again, 1962, this one, from Newbold Herrick, Harold Herrick's son, to the museum, again, referring to his Captain Ben Verity decoys, which are now identified as Obadiah Verity, and his Bunn decoys as Captain Bill Bowman. The history of Bill Bowman identifies him as someone who was from Maine, who came down to Long Island to hunt and carve decoys, but the Herrick family, which is the basis for the Bowman attribution, does not place him in Maine, even though that's where he is placed now currently. So in 1966, William Mackey, again, did an appraisal letter for the decoys the Herricks had donated to the museum. And he valued the 17, again, what they called Bowman shorebirds at $25,000 at the time, and 16 other decoys they had donated at only $1,000, just over $1,000. Again, this was all done as a tax, for tax purposes, as a charitable contribution for the Herrick family. For doing this, Mackey received in payment a hollow carved, what they would call Bowman curlew for his efforts. The only new information really provided in this appraisal is Mackey says Bowman is from Bangor, Maine, which again never appeared in any of the letters from the Herrick family to the museum. So Bill Mackey wrote an article that was published in something called Decoy Collector's Guide in the 66-67 annual about Bill Bowman. And this was based on him visiting Newbold and Harold Herrick at their law office. And he wrote this article based on information they had provided. And again, some of the things in here, refers to Bowman's drinking at the time, and that he wouldn't carve unless his jug was full of alcohol. And he was a bit of a hermit, living out in the marsh. Again, traveling from Bangor, Maine down to Long Island for the purposes of hunting and making these decoys. And again, he concludes with, thus we end the meager known facts of Bill Bowman. And again, we question whether how much factual information is actually provided in this article. So this is one of the birds that was donated by the Herrick family to the museum. In the bottom of that decoy, it has the H, which was the Herrick mark, rig mark. And then there's another name, which is branded in a decoy, T.F. Norton. So of the 20 shorebirds of this style the family donated to the museum, 16 of them have this other name branded in the decoy. The Herrick family story is that these shorebird decoys were obtained directly from Bill Bowman as he sat and carved them out in the marshes of Lawrence. But this other name does call that into question, because clearly they passed through someone else's ownership between Bowman and Herrick, where they acquired this T.F. Norton name. We've been researching who this person is, have some interesting leads, but nothing that positively identifies him at this time. Here's a duck decoy that was donated by Newbold Herrick to the museum. It has the Newbold Leroy Herrick brand in it, the NLH, in the bottom of that decoy. So here's Bill Mackey with the curlew he was given, again, for doing that appraisal for the Herrick family. We don't know where Herrick acquired it. We know where Mackey acquired it in 1966. Again, it was given to him for his services. It sold in that auction in 1973 for over $10,000. It was the first decoy to sell for over $10,000. It was bought by Jim McCleary. And then it sold in the McCleary auction in 2000 for over $460,000. So we can sort of track the history of that decoy, and it remains in that Jim Doherty family collection at this time. So when I began researching the sort of decoys of Charles Bunn, I started to look at where the known hunting rigs were in relation to Charles Bunn. And we identify these hunting rigs because they're branded with the name of these people, or we can connect these people directly to Charles Bunn. So the ones I focused on was Harry Davis Ives. You can see the proximity to the reservation here, Newbold Edgar, Orson Munn, and all living within 5 miles of Charles Bunn. The outlier, again, is the Herrick family, which was in that Cedarhurst, Lawrence area, which is approximately 75 miles to the west, but we can make some connection to them as well. So starting with Newbold Edgar, he was a very wealthy attorney, sportsman, had residences in New York City, Tuxedo Park, and Southampton. He lived within 3 miles of Charles Bunn. We know there are Brant, black ducks, redheads, canvasbacks, and at least one scoter that carry his brand. He's a well-documented client and close friend of Charles Bunn. Alice Bunn Martinez describes him in the transcripts that when she discussed her father. We know they hunted together in Montauk and Canada. And an interesting little tidbit is Newbold Edgar actually took golf lessons from Charles Bunn's brother, Oscar, who worked at the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club. Here we have a picture of Newbold Edgar. He was also an avid fisherman that was taken off the Florida Keys. So this photo has some interesting notes written on it. And it was actually given to Charles Bunn at Newbold Edgar's passing. And again, that's because there were other folks in the area who knew the close relationship between Charles Bunn and Newbold Edgar. And they thought Charles would really cherish having this photo of Newbold Edgar, and it stays in the family. David Bunn Martine actually has this photograph. This is a brand from the Edgar rig. There's the Edgar brand that's in the bottom of this decoy. So this is a shorebird decoy that also has the Edgar brand. It's the only currently known shorebird that has the Edgar brand in it. And again, from the Alice Bunn Martinez transcripts, there's a quote here: Newbold Leroy Edgar wanted to hunt ducks and geese and snipe and small game, with, again, snipe being the term used for all shorebirds at the time. Here's a photograph, or actually a postcard, of Newbold Edgar's residence in Southampton, again, less than 3 miles from the reservation. This is from the East Hampton Star in October 1935, an article that was written: Newbold Edgar, who almost lived at Montauk winters, would always have as his guide Charles Bunn, a well-educated Shinnecock Indian. This is from Jeanette Edward Rattray's book in 1938 about Montauk. And again, right in the center, she talks about Newbold Edgar coming to Montauk and bringing his Shinnecock Indian guide, Charles Bunn, with him. So this was this is a photograph of the Montauk Inn, again, built by the Long Island Railroad in the late 1800s. Many sportsmen would stay there. Charles Bunn refers to hunting at Montauk with his sports in that 1952 article. And this place is also referenced in the Martinez transcripts when she was discussing her father hunting at Montauk with Newbold Edgar. Orson Munn was also a wealthy attorney, residence in New York City and Southampton. Also, we have documented him visiting Tuxedo Park, so the 3 places we can connect Newbold Edgar to. We have a quote from Orson Munn Jr. where he says, "I can't imagine my father purchasing decoys from anyone but Charles Bunn." Orson Munn was Bunn's attorney. He did draw up his last will and testament. And then we have Orson Munn Sr.'s gunning diary, which has specific quotes to hunting with Charles Bunn. One from 1907, where they were hunting plover, killing a total of 37 birds. And then one from Montauk, again, a very important gunning area at the time, where Orson Munn and Charles Bunn actually hunted with Newbold Edgar. So we can connect the 3 men to this location. And a link to Newbold Herrick, again, who's the one outlier not in Southampton, is Munn and Herrick hunted together very often. They had a nickname as the Heavenly Twins, and they were both members of the Flanders Club and resigned together at the same time in 1939. Here are 2 shorebird decoys that were in the Munn family and went to auction in 1986. The Munn family provided the attribution of Charles Bunn, because that's they had known that Orson Sr. had gotten his decoys from. And then in the auction description, it talks about Orson Munn acquiring them on Shinnecock Bay, where he purchased them, which again is where Charles Bunn obviously lived and worked, and William Bowman was 75 miles to the west. Here's a decoy that remains in the Munn family. It's actually branded Ives, and I'll talk a little bit more about Ives. So Harry Davis Ives was an architect for McKim, Mead, and White, a very prominent firm at the time. He lived across the street from the Shinnecock Reservation, actually in the Artist Village. And we know there are black ducks and redheads that carry his brand. He is specifically referenced in the Alice Bunn Martinez transcripts, where she described where he lived and that her father, Charles, hunted with Ives. And then she also gave an account of her family attending a Christmas party at the Ives residence, where they were given very generous gifts. You can see here on this map from 1929 that shows the proximity of the reservation to where Harry Davis Ives lived. So this is a group of shorebird decoys that came from the Lawrence family, and they're all branded RL for Robert Lawrence. The family at the time they consigned them to Sotheby's in 1997 did not specifically mention the name Charles Bunn, but they did know that Robert had bought them from the Shinnecock Indians. When they went to auction, they were attributed to William Bowman by the auctioneer, which at the time was the name that was given to these decoys. Here are a couple of them close up, and you can see the RL, the Robert Lawrence brand, in the bottom of those decoys. That sold in 1997, and then again at auction in 2014. So here are a couple of the covers of the articles on Charles Bunn that were published in Decoy magazine. The first one in 2004, written by Jamie Reason. I had written one in 2014, again, focused on the rigs that existed in the town of Southampton. And then Jamie had written an article about dating those birds in 2015 based on some art that were likely was used as patterns by Charles Bunn to make those decoys. And then I had a later article that was published. Unfortunately, I didn't get the cover, so it's not pictured here. So there was a book written by Dr. Gaynell Stone on the Shinnecocks. She also reviewed the research we had done. And again, you can see the quote where she thinks it's the evidence, supports Bunn as the carver of these decoys. This is a decoy that is in my collection. Very interesting bird. Came with a paper label on the bottom of it. And that label seen here talks that, this was acquired or made by the last full-blooded male Shinnecock Indian in Southampton, speaks about a produce stand in the Shinnecock Hills, and that the person who bought it was named Ernest Demerchi in 1940. So again, some of those quotes here, Charles Bunn has been referred to as the last full-blooded male Shinnecock Indian. Whether that's true or not, that's how he's been referred to. There's Mary's in Charles Bunn's family that this could be referring to as well. The Bunn family did have a market garden where they sold vegetables to the summer colonists. So that reference here is supported. And again, Ernest Demerchi was actually a chauffeur for a Beard family, which I'll talk a little bit about. And I will also, show some evidence how we can place Ernest Demerchi in Southampton at this time. So Anson McCook Beard, again, Demerchi was the chauffeur for this gentleman, also an attorney, not by coincidence, had residence in Southampton, New York City, and Tuxedo Park. Same three locations where we can place Newbold Edgar. His Southampton home was known as Eden Cottage. It was on Gin Lane, which is the same street that Orson Munn's home, known as the Arches, was on. So we have Beard, Edgar, and Munn, all three wealthy attorneys, all in close proximity to each other, very likely acquainted with each other, and likely that's what brought Beard chauffeur Demerchi to Southampton and put him into contact with Charles Bunn when he purchased that black duck with the paper label in 1940. Here's that bird again, and I have found an article from the County Review that was published in July 1940 that places Demerchi in Southampton the same year he purchased the decoy, as stated on that paper label. This is a photograph taken in 2005 by me at the museums at Stony Brook, where Orson Munn Jr. Traveled with myself and Jamie Reason to look at the decoys in their collection. He brought two of the decoys that remain in the in the Munn family. He looked at the decoys in the museum's collection and instantly, agreed they were made by the same man who made his father's decoys, which again was Charles Sumner Bunn. The other gentleman pictured here is Donald O'Brien Jr., and I'll speak a little bit more about him. So this is from Donald O'Brien Jr. Donald was an early collector of decoys. He's also a decoy carver, very well respected in the decoy community. And this is in an email he had sent to me, again, talking about that visit. Orson Munn is not a decoy collector. He never heard of Bill Bowman. No reason to identify his father's decoys as made by anyone other than Charles Sumner Bunn. Orson, in reviewing all the information, no one argues that they're beautiful decoys, but basically saying he believes, based on this information, that they were made by Charles Sumner Bunn and not Bill Bowman. And basically there's no doubt in his mind who made these decoys. This is the Charles Bunn curlew that was given to Bill Mackey for his appraisal of the Herrick family donation. And then there's a pintail at the bottom with carved wings, very similar. If you look at them close up, the carving style is the same, the cut is the same on that Charles Bunn pintail as it is on that curlew in the wing. So even though one is a duck and one is a shorebird decoy, the carving style is the same. This is an advertisement of one of those Robert Lawrence shorebird decoys that you can see. It was published in Decoy Magazine in 2013 by Dick McIntyre. Again, another long time decoy collector, very knowledgeable individual about decoys. He advertises it as Charles Sumner Bunn. So he's fully supportive of the Bunn attribution, totally dropping the Bill Bowman name from the birds he's selling. So here's was Charles Bunn's obituary. Again, it refers to him as a professional guide and references a trapper, that he led hunting parties throughout the States and Canada, and also known or well known for his life decoys, which he hand carved. This is a letter that Dick McIntyre actually wrote to Decoy Magazine and was published. Again, basically stating his belief that the Bill Bowman decoys were actually made by Charles Sumner Bunn, and that this basically erases the argument that Bill Bowman was the maker. And I will stop there. Let's see if I can stop sharing. And, I went pretty quickly because I know there's a lot of slides, but I wanted to try to get through as many as I could. And I guess we'll throw it back to Connor, right? If we wanted to see if there's any questions or additional information I could provide.
Yeah, that was great. It's good on timing. We're right there at that sweet spot, 30 minutes. It all works out. Yeah, so if anybody does have any questions, please do feel free to submit them in either the chat function or the Q&A function, which you can see on the, if you're on a computer, the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. If you're on a phone or an iPad, you might have to click like the little ellipses for the other options and things like that. But yeah, no, this was really great, informative talk. We have a decent amount of decoys and stuff in our collection at the museum. Have you ever been by to see our decoy shed that we have on the property?
I haven't, but I definitely will. Yeah, I definitely will, Connor.
Yeah, in the summer times, we have 14 outbuildings on the property of the Rogers Mansion. And in the summertime, we usually open them all up when there's good weather. So you could always take a look inside. And in there's a good amount of decoys of there's ducks and Canadian geese and things like that. And there's also like clamming rakes and things like that. All thing a good bayman would need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were so many, people, particularly at the, late 1800s, early 1900s that were dependent on the marsh and the surrounding waters for food and for living, for basic living.
Yeah. So let's see. So we have somebody asking, do you find many counterfeit decoys?
That's a very good question. And I think like anything where there's high value involved, there's the potential for counterfeiting. And there's two schools here. There are folks that are making decoys currently that look antique. They're just very skilled makers. And thankfully, most of them mark their decoys, so you wouldn't think they were made from that time period. But unfortunately, there are some that do not, and those may at times pass as antique or late 1800, early 1900 decoys. So, and then again, when money's involved, there's definitely people who will try to pass current decoys as older decoys. It's really an unfortunate part of the hobby.
Yeah, and like you said, anything when it comes to collecting, and as soon as things get slightly valuable, there's always a chance for people to play games like that.
Yeah,
I'll say, yeah, I growing up on Long Island here on the East End, we just always had decoy ducks in the house. My family were not hunters, did not live by the water, anything like that, but there was always just like, a duck or two on the mantle or things like that. And it felt weird when I went to college in the Midwest to not really see that, because where I went to school, we were far away from the Great Lakes and stuff, and where I guess people just weren't that into it. Where it feels like out here, even if you're not a hunting person per se, there's just weird remnants of things like decoy ducks and stuff just in and around in our lives.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks, like you said, growing up near the water, and even if they weren't hunters, we're surrounded by water here as an island, and people often use decoys as a decorative feature. They might have one or two on a mantle, just as that connection to sort of the local history.
Yeah, I know specifically we always had one by the garage door where you'd put your keys. It had you hit the tail and you'd open up. It's like a little hideaway spot to hide the keys. Yeah, we have another question here. Do you know how many Bunn decoys exist today, if possible?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question, because there are some makers where we have a pretty good idea of their output. And unfortunately for Charles Bunn, we don't really have an estimate on the number of decoys. Again, we know he was very prolific. His daughter, Alice, referenced that he was selling them by the hundreds. And again, he had a very extensive carving career. He did live into his late 80s and was carving almost up to the end. Maybe that last year he talked about, arthritis sort of getting the best of him. But, if you think about someone over a 60-year span, which is likely his carving career, and relying on this for his business as a guide, he made decoys that they would guide over and then selling. I think a safe assumption is it's in the thousands, but we don't have any more precise number than that.
Yeah, definitely a hard thing to calculate, but yeah, which makes it a little harder for all the people making those counterfeit ones, because you'll never know really how many there are.
Yeah, when it comes to decoys, these guys didn't look at decoys as anything more than a tool. It was used as a way to shoot ducks and shorebirds. And the record keeping, there wasn't a need for them to really track how many they were making, or, it just wasn't important enough at the time. It's information now as collectors we'd like to have, but to them, it wasn't critical how many he made in any given year.
Yeah, it's something I do think about a lot with working in a museum, where so much of the stuff that we collect and place value on and put behind glass, walls and show off are everyday items, where if you teleported someone from back in time, they would just be very confused why we have their dinner plate on display.
Yeah. I'm sure if Charles Bunn was able to see that one of his decoys sold for over $460,000, he wouldn't believe it, because he probably sold that decoy, when originally, who knows, for $1, whatever amount it was sold for. He just would blow his mind that it's bringing that sort of money these days.
So we have someone asking, in your research, did you find any reference to Dr. William Helmuth? He was a bird watcher, but often went out with Bunn. I will have to look for any photo I might have.
Yeah, that is a name I am not familiar with. We didn't find it in our research. It did not appear in the Alice Bunn Martinez transcripts, even though she, referenced dozens of people that knew her father. So it's definitely a name I'll start looking into. And yes, please, if you have any information that you can share, if it's okay, Connor, I could just put
Yeah.
my email in the chat. Really, even if you don't have a photo, just the information you have that's connecting this person to Charles Bunn would be helpful. I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be really great. So this is always a great chance for guests to, supply us with new information and speakers and things like that. It's always a fun extra thing that comes when we do these talks.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of usually hopeful
Yeah.
that someone brings forward something that I haven't found or thought of, and it's just another avenue to pursue.
Yeah, I know in the talk that I gave, I had an image I was using that had Japanese characters on it that I was having trouble getting translated because I can't really type those into Google Translate with my keyboard. And somebody that came to one of my talks, his wife or his sister-in-law, I think, was Japanese and was able to translate them for me. So things like that just sort of happen, which is always nice. Let's see. We have another question that came in. Did Bunn or other Shinnecock carvers make fish decoys, especially eel decoys? And has Bunn's work been exhibited nationally, such as at the Ward Museum in Salisbury, Maryland, or the Abe Museum in Bar Harbor?
Yeah, so we don't have any references that Charles Bunn made fish decoys or eel decoys, or that anyone else on Shinnecock did. It would not be surprising if they did. I mean, that's very possible. We just haven't found any references to tie them to that type of decoy. As far as exhibiting, it hasn't been exhibited at those museums specifically referenced. We did have an exhibit for an extended period here locally at the Suffolk County Historical Society in Riverhead. It was, a fair number of decoys, maybe a dozen decoys, and then historical information on Charles Bunn. Photographs were part of a larger exhibit on Native Americans on Long Island. So we did have that. That was maybe a year or so ago, pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Let's see. I think if anybody else has any other questions, please send them in now. But I think we maybe covered most of what everybody was asking about. Yeah, Joe, this was a really great talk. It's always fun, especially for me to hear like the little histories of important people like Charles and his contributions to just the local community. And it's just another great, interesting little story. And I'm sure that everybody here enjoyed it. Hopefully everybody out here on YouTube watching this down the line in the future enjoys this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. I'm sure I'll have the contact info for the museum down below. So if anybody has other information that they find, I could always pass them along to Joe in the future. Yeah, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today, everyone watching in the future. And thank you, Joe, for doing today's talk.
Oh, thank you, Connor, for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.